The world of young Arthur Penhaligon, in the year of our Lord 1888, was a symphony of grey. It was the grey of the London fog that seeped into his bones. The grey of the cobblestones slick with rain and horse-drawn filth. And the grey of the future that stretched out before him like an endless, unchanging road. His life was measured not in years, but in the wearing down of the leather on his patched shoes. They were his only inheritance from a father he barely remembered, a dockworker swallowed by the very fog that now defined Arthur's existence. The shoes, once sturdy and proud, were a roadmap of his poverty, a patch over the left toe, stitched by his own clumsy hands with a stolen needle and thread, marked the winter he'd spent hauling coal. A second sole, crudely glued to the right, was a souvenir from a summer spent cleaning the fish markets of Billingsgate. He cared for them with a fierce, desperate pride, polishing the worn leather with fish oil until they offered a dull, pathetic gleam. These shoes were his reality. They kept his feet from the cold stone. And for that, he was grateful, but they also anchored him to it. His days were spent at the textile mills, a cog in a vast, thundering machine. For 12 hours, he breathed in cotton dust, his ears ringing with the deafening clatter of looms, his hands raw from handling the rough fibers. He earned pennies, a meager sum that barely covered the rent for his sliver of a room in a Whitechapel tenement and a daily loaf of stale bread. His dream, however, was not grey. It was a vibrant, impossible gold. It was the color of the pocket watches he saw dangling from the waistcoats of the men who stepped out of polished carriages. It was the warm, buttery light that spilled from the windows of Mayfair mansions. He didn't have a name for this dream. It was simply more. More than the dust, more than the hunger, more than the suffocating smallness of his life. He saved. Oh, how he saved. This was the first rule he understood. The gospel of the poor. Every halfpenny not spent on rent or bread was tucked away in a loose floorboard beneath his cot. He treated saving as a virtue, a holy act. He would eat less, walk further to save the tram fare, and shiver in the cold rather than buy an extra lump of coal. The growing pile of coins was his secret comfort, a tangible piece of that golden dream. He believed that if he just saved enough, a door would magically open. After 2 years of relentless, painful frugality, he had amassed £5. To him, it was a fortune, a king's ransom. It felt heavy in his pocket, a physical weight of hope. And that was when Silas found him. Silas was a man who smiled with too many teeth and spoke in whispers that sounded like secrets. He worked at the mill, too, but he always seemed cleaner, his eyes constantly darting, searching for an angle. He found Arthur during a rare lunch break, huddled away from the others. "Penhaligon," Silas began, his voice slick as oil. "I see you, quiet, hard-working. You're not like these other louts, content with their lot. You have ambition." Arthur, unaccustomed to such attention, merely nodded, clutching his bread. "I have an opportunity," Silas continued, leaning closer. "A friend of a friend is bringing a new steam-powered engine from America. An automaton that can do the work of 20 men. The company is selling initial shares to raise capital. Small investors, like us, double your money in a month. They say, triple it in 2. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the door, not a magical one, but a real, tangible opportunity. "Shares?" Arthur asked, the word foreign on his tongue. "You give them your money. They give you a piece of the company. When the company gets rich, you get rich," Silas explained, simplifying the concept to its most seductive form. "But you have to be quick. It's a secret, for the smart ones." Doubt wrestled with desperation in Arthur's mind. The £5 under his floorboard represented 2 years of hunger and cold. It was his safety net, his entire world. But Silas's words painted a picture of a world without nets, a world where he could fly. The thought of tripling his money, of finally being able to walk away from the mill, was intoxicating. The rich versus poor mindset, as he would later understand it, was playing out within him. The poor mindset clung to the security of the £5. The mistaken, rich mindset saw the leverage of a quick return. "All of it?" Arthur whispered. "Fortune favors the bold, my friend," Silas said with a conspiratorial wink. That night, Arthur pried up the floorboard. The coins felt cold, final. He handed them over to Silas the next day, receiving a crisp, important-looking certificate in return. For a week, he walked on air. He looked at the other mill workers with a kind of pity. They were trapped. He was on his way out. The month passed. Then 2. Silas grew evasive. His smiles became tight. His whispers hurried. One Monday morning, Silas wasn't at the mill. Nor the next day. A cold dread, far worse than the London chill, began to creep into Arthur's heart. He went to the address on the certificate. It was a derelict warehouse. Empty save for dust and rats. The company, the automaton, the shares, it was all a phantom. A lie. He had lost everything. He was back to zero. But it was worse than before. Before, he had ignorance and a flicker of hope. Now, he had the bitter taste of foolishness. He had not just lost his money, he had lost his faith in himself. He looked down at his patched shoes. They seemed to mock him. Symbols of a poverty he had tried and failed to escape. That night, for the first time since he was a boy, he wept. The failure was a crucible. It burned away his naivety, leaving behind a hard, painful lesson. Working hard and saving hard were not enough. He had been a fool, chasing a shortcut because he didn't understand the road. He had saved pennies, but he had no idea how to make them grow. He had guarded his money but had been careless with his trust. The despair lingered for weeks. The mill felt heavier, the fog thicker, but in the depths of his misery, a new feeling emerged, anger. Not at Silas, but at himself, at his own ignorance. He had been a willing victim because he knew nothing of the world of money, of business, of the men in the polished carriages. One rainy Sunday, seeking shelter, he stumbled into the St. George's Public Library. The warmth was the first thing he noticed, followed by the quiet reverence and the smell of old paper and leather. It was a world away from the mill. He wandered the aisles, his rough hands tracing the spines of books. He saw titles on engineering, philosophy, and history. Then, he found a section labeled Economics and Commerce. He pulled out a book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, by Adam Smith. The language was dense, the concepts alien, but he sat, and he read. He didn't understand most of it, but a single idea lodged in his mind. Wealth wasn't just a pile of gold, it was a system. It was about production, trade, value, and labor. That day marked his true turning point. The library became his church. Every evening after his grueling shift at the mill, he would go to the library. He would wash his hands meticulously, so as not to soil the pages. He devoured books on accounting, on the biographies of American industrialists like Vanderbilt and Carnegie, on philosophy and human nature. He learned that these men didn't get rich by finding a secret tip. They got rich by understanding systems, by providing immense value, and by reinvesting in their enterprises. He started a new ledger. It wasn't for money. On one side, he wrote, time spent. On the other, knowledge gained. Monday, 2 hours. Read about double-entry bookkeeping. Key concept. Assets equals liabilities plus equity. Tuesday, 2.5 hours. Biography of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Key concept. Consolidate competition. Control the system, railroads. Wednesday, 1.5 hours. Studied basic contract law. Key concept. A man's word is important, but a written contract is binding. He was changing. The dust of the mill was still on his clothes, but his mind was traveling to places he'd never dreamed of. He realized his most critical error. He had tried to invest his money before investing in himself. His £5 had been clueless capital. Now, he was building intellectual capital, something no Silas could ever steal. His perspective shifted from blind saving to strategic value. He thought, don't just save pennies, increase your value to earn pounds. He left the mind-numbing labor of the mill for a job as a clerk's assistant at a small shipping company. It paid slightly less initially, a terrifying prospect, but it offered something the mill never could: proximity to the world he was studying. His new boss was Mr. Abernathy, a kind but perpetually stressed man in his late 50s. The office was a chaotic mess of invoices, shipping manifests, and angry letters from clients. Arthur saw the chaos not as a problem, but as an opportunity. Using his newfound knowledge from the library, he started organizing the paperwork in his own time. He created a simple ledger system, tracking incoming payments and outgoing expenses. He noticed patterns. Mr. Abernathy, he said one afternoon, holding up 2 invoices. We paid the same supplier twice for the same shipment last month. And this client here is 3 months late on a rather large payment. If we had a system to track these things. Abernathy, who had been too overwhelmed to notice, stared at the young man. He saw not just a clerk, but a mind at work. Show me, son, he said. Arthur worked tirelessly. He implemented his bookkeeping system, saving the company money and improving its cash flow almost immediately. He learned about negotiation by listening to Abernathy on the telephone. He learned about logistics by studying the shipping routes. He wasn't just doing a job, he was continuing his education. Using the real world as his textbook. His relationship with Abernathy evolved from employer-employee to mentor-mentee. You have a good head on your shoulders, Arthur, Abernathy told him one day. But you're still thinking too small. You saved me a few pounds, and that's good. But the real money isn't in saving pounds, it's in creating new ones. This was the next evolution in his thinking. From saving, to increasing personal value, to creating value for others. He noticed that many of the small businesses the company dealt with, bakers, tailors, chandlers, were just as chaotic as Abernathy's office had been. They were experts at their craft but clueless about their finances. They were losing money and didn't even know it. An idea sparked. In the evenings, after his work for Abernathy, he started offering his services. For a few shillings a week, he would organize their books. He didn't just record numbers, he offered insights. Mr. Gable, he'd say to the baker, you're losing money on your Wednesday bake because of spoilage. If you baked half the amount and advertised a fresh afternoon batch, you might sell out and increase your profit margin. To the tailor, he advised, if you buy your thread in bulk before the winter price increase, you'll save 20% over the year. His reputation grew by word of mouth. He was the numbers boy, the young man who could find money people didn't know they had. He was no longer trading his time for pennies at a mill, he was trading his knowledge for a fee. And his knowledge was creating tangible value for his clients. Soon, he was earning more from his evening work than from his day job. The day he walked into a proper shoe store and bought a new pair of sturdy, unscuffed leather shoes was a milestone. They felt strange on his feet. Light and solid. He didn't throw the old patched ones away. He cleaned them one last time and placed them in a box. They were no longer a symbol of poverty, but a reminder of his journey. He quit his job with Abernathy, who gave him his blessing and became his first official client. Penhaligon Financial Services was born, operating out of his now slightly larger rented room. But with success came a new, more formidable challenge. The established accounting firms of London, with their fancy offices and pedigreed partners, began to notice. They saw this upstart from Whitechapel poaching their potential smaller clients. They began to compete, offering similar services at cut-rate prices. Some of his clients, tempted by the lower fees, left. Fear, cold and familiar, gripped Arthur. He was tempted to cut his own prices, to engage in a race to the bottom, a return to the scarcity mindset. He looked at his old patched shoes. He remembered the lesson. Compete on price, and you'll always be a commodity. Compete on value, and you become a necessity. He didn't lower his prices. He increased his value. He leveraged the one thing the big firms couldn't replicate, his deep personal relationships with his clients. He wasn't just their accountant, he was their trusted advisor. He spent more time with them, understanding the soul of their businesses, not just their balance sheets. He started publishing a small, weekly newsletter, The Prudent Businessman, filled with financial tips, market insights, and strategies for small enterprises. He was giving away knowledge for free, building a community and establishing himself as an authority. He began to create systems. He developed standardized financial planning packages tailored for different trades. He hired and trained other bright young men and women from humble backgrounds, teaching them his methods. He wasn't just a service anymore, he was building a machine. A system, just like the industrialists he had read about. But his machine wasn't made of steam and steel, it was made of knowledge, trust, and human potential. The tide turned. Clients who had left for cheaper rates came back, realizing that the advice and partnership Arthur offered were worth far more than the few shillings they saved. His firm grew, moving from his room to a small office, then to a larger one. The story now fast-forwards 20 years. To New York City, 1908. Arthur Penhaligon was no longer the numbers boy. He was A.R. Penhaligon, a name synonymous with investment banking and financial strategy on 2 continents. His firm, Penhaligon & Company, occupied 3 floors of a skyscraper in Manhattan, its windows overlooking the very harbor where men like his father had once toiled. He was a billionaire, not just in money, but in influence and reputation. He sat in his spacious, mahogany-paneled office. The city hummed below, a testament to the commerce and ambition he had mastered. He was dressed in a finely tailored suit, and on his feet were shoes handmade from the finest Italian leather. But in a glass case by his desk, illuminated by a soft light, sat a pair of old, Battered shoes with a clumsy patch on the left toe and a second sole glued to the right. A young, ambitious junior executive named Thomas knocked and entered, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and nervousness. "Mr. Penhaligon, the final papers for the transatlantic shipping merger are ready for your signature." Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm smile that belied his powerful reputation. "One moment, Thomas, come here." He gestured towards the glass case. "Do you know what those are?" "Your old shoes, sir. The story is famous around the office," Thomas said respectfully. "They are not just shoes," Arthur said, his voice softening. "They are my most important professors. They taught me the 4 pillars of the life I have built." He looked from the shoes to the young man's eager face. "The first lesson," he began, "is about mindset. When I wore those shoes, I had a poverty mindset. I thought only of saving, of scarcity, of protecting the little I had. I was so afraid of losing my pennies that I couldn't see how to create pounds. The wealthy mindset isn't about hoarding money, it's about putting it to work. Seeing opportunities, and understanding that value is created, not just saved. The second lesson is here," he said, tapping his temple. "My first investment was a disaster because I invested my money before I invested in myself. That library, Thomas, was the greatest stock purchase I ever made. The time you spend learning, honing your skills, understanding your world, that is the only investment that guarantees an infinite return. Increase your own value before you ask the world to value you." The third lesson is about saving. The boy who wore those shoes saved blindly, starving himself for a pile of coins he didn't know how to use. Don't just save, save with a purpose. Your money should be an army of soldiers you send out to conquer new territory, to buy an asset, to learn a new skill, to start a venture. Saving for the sake of saving is a cage. He paused, his gaze returning to the city below. And the final, most important lesson, is about resources. Everyone thinks money is the most important resource. It isn't. Your most valuable resources are your time, your focus, and your relationships. I failed when I gave my money to a fool. I succeeded when I gave my time and knowledge to Mr. Abernathy and my clients. I built this firm not on capital, but on trust. Use your time wisely, focus on what truly matters, and build relationships based on mutual value and respect. That is how you build an empire." Arthur turned back and signed the papers with a steady hand. "The billionaire's dream, Thomas," he concluded, looking at the young man, "is not about having $1 billion. It's about becoming the person who is capable of creating that value in the world. The money is just a byproduct. Now, go and start building." As Thomas left, his mind racing, Arthur looked at his old, patched shoes one last time. They were a reminder of where he came from, but also a testament to the incredible distance one could travel, not by changing one's shoes, but by changing the mind of the man who wore them. The dream was never about the shoes, it was about the journey. And the journey was just beginning for a new generation.